General trends, like the coincident decline of the nation-state and the growth of antisemitism, can hardly ever be explained satisfactorily by one reason or by one cause alone. The historian is in most such cases confronted with a very complex historical situation where he is almost at liberty, and that means at a loss, to isolate one factor as the spirit of the time. Persecutions of powerless or power-losing groups may not be a very pleasant spectacle, but it does not spring from human meanness alone. What makes men obey or tolerate real power and, on the other hand, hate people who have wealth without power is the rational instinct that power has a certain function and is of some general use. Even exploitation and oppression still make society work and establish some kind of order. Only wealth without power or aloofness without a policy are felt to be parasitical, useless, revolting, because such conditions cut all the threads which tie men together. Wealth which does not exploit lacks even the relationship exists between exploiter and exploited. Aloofness with policy does not imply even the minimum concern of the oppressor for the oppressed. The general decline of Western and Central European Jewry, however, constitutes merely the atmosphere in which the subsequent event took place. The decline itself explains them as little as their mere loss of power by the aristocracy would explain the French Revolution. To be aware of such general rules is important only in order to refute those recommendations of common sense which led us to believe that violent hatred or sudden rebellion springs necessarily from great power and great abuses, and that consequently organized hatred of the Jews cannot be a reaction to their importance and power. The theory that the Jews are always the scapegoat implies that the scapegoat might have been anyone else as well. It upholds the perfect innocence of the victim, an innocence which insinuates not only that no evil was done, but that nothing at all was done which might possibly have a connection with the issue at stake. It is true that the scapegoat theory in its purely arbitrary form never appears in print. Whenever, however, its adherents painstakingly try to explain why a specific scapegoat was so well suited to his role, they show that they have left the theory behind them and have got themselves involved in the usual historical research, where nothing is ever discovered except that history is made by many groups and that for certain reason one group was singled out. The so-called scapegoat necessarily cases to be the innocent victim whom the world blames for all its sins and through whom it wishes to escape punishment. It becomes a group of people among other groups, all of which are involved in the business of this world. And it does not simply cease to be corresponsible because it became the victim of the world's injustice and cruelty. Until recent, the inner inconsistency of the scapegoat theory was sufficient reason to discard it as one of many theories which are motivated by escapism. But the rise of terror as a major weapon of government has lent it as credible greater than it ever had before. A fundamental difference between modern dictatorship and all other tyrannies of the past is that terror is no longer used as a means to exterminate and frighten opponent, but as an instrument to rule masses of people who are perfectly obedient. Terror, as we know it today, strikes without any preliminary provocation. Its victims are innocent even from the point of view of the persecutor. We are not concerned here with the ultimate consequence of rule by terror, namely that nobody, not even the executors, can ever be free of fear. In our context, we are dealing merely with the arbitrariness by which victims are chosen, and for this it is decisive that they are objectively innocent, that they are chosen regardless of what they may or may not have done. At first glance, this may look like a belated confirmation of the old scapegoat theory, and it is true that the victim of modern terror does show all the characters of the scapegoat. He is objectively and absolutely innocent because nothing he did or omitted to do matter or any connections with his fate. There is therefore a temptation to return to an explanation which automatically discharges the victim of responsibility. It seems quite adequate to a reality in which nothing strikes us more forcefully than the utter innocence of the individual caught in the horror machine and his utter inability to change his fate. Terror, however, is only in the last instance of its development a mere form of government. In order to establish a totalitarian regime, terror must be presented as an instrument for carrying out a specific ideology, and that ideology must have won the adherence of many, and even a majority, before terror can be stabilized. The point for the historian is that the Jews, before becoming the main victim of modern terror, were the center of Nazi ideology, and an ideology which has to persuade and mobilize people cannot choose its victims arbitrarily. In other words, if a passion for Gary, like the protocols of the elders of Zion, is believed by so many people that it can become the text of a whole political movement, the task of the historians is no longer to discover as forgery. Certainly, it is not to invent explanations which dismiss the chief political and historical fact of the matter, that the forgery is being believed. This fact is more important than the, historically speaking, secondary circumstances that it is forgery. Plato, in his famous fight against the ancient sophists, discovered that their universal art of enchanting the mind by arguments, Phaedrus 261, had nothing to do with truth, but aimed at opinion which by their very nature are changing, and which are valid only at the time of the agreement and as long as the agreement lasts. Theaetetus 172. He also discovered the very insecure position of truth in the world, for from opinions comes persuasion and not from truth. Phaedrus 260. The most striking difference between ancient and modern sophists is that the ancient were satisfied with a passing victory of the arguments at the expenses of truth, whereas the moderns want a more lasting victory of the expenses of reality. In other words, one destroyed the dignity of human thought, whereas the others destroy the dignity of human action. The old manipulators of logic were the concern of the philosopher, whereas the modern manipulators of the facts stand in the way of the historian. For history itself is destroyed, and its comprehensibility, based upon the fact that it is enacted by man and therefore can be understood by man, is in danger whenever facts are no longer held to be part and parcel of the past and present world and are misused to prove this or that opinion. The simultaneous decline of the European nation-state and growth of anti-Semitic movements, the coincident downfall of nationally organized Europe and the extermination of Jews, was prepared for by the victory of antisemitism over all competing isms in the present struggle for persuasion of public opinion, have to be taken as a serious indication of the source of antisemitism.